Hey everybody, welcome back to Reckoning with Jason Herbert. I am Jason Herbert, and I think you know that last week I was on the road. I was on the road quite a bit. I went out to the great state of Missouri to give talks at two different universities, and the podcast we have for you today is actually the live podcast taping I did at Missouri S&T University with the amazing Dr. John McManus. Now, if you don't know John, you probably do already because he's the host of an incredibly successful podcast called Someone Talked. He is the military historian at Missouri S&T and has been all over the interwebs and television, including CNN, Fox News, the Military Channel, Discovery Channel, National Geographic Channel, Netflix, Smithsonian, History Channel, PBS. Anywhere there's a camera, John has been there, and there's a reason for that. In talking with John, this guy is so freaking cool. I didn't know him very well before we did the pod, and he's just such an amazing guy and such a fountain of knowledge when it comes to both World War II, film, military history, and he's the best freaking dude. I just loved talking to him. And what we decided we would do, we'd actually talk about World War II films over time, talk about the evolution of World War II films, really kind of starting during the war period, coming all the way up until today. And what we also did was do a live Q&A with the audience to really get at the questions our audience members had. And all of that is right here for you today. Now, making this possible, I really do have to thank some people who brought me out to Missouri to give some of these talks and make this happen. First of all, Rolla, Missouri is such a cool and amazing place. I was blown away. The people there were great. First and foremost, I have to thank the students for coming out. I had lunch with some of their amazing history students, got to know them a little bit, got to know some of the other students at the university, and you guys are rock stars. I love you guys so very much. So if you're listening to me, I think you guys are absolutely amazing. Seeing you was the absolute best part of the trip. You guys are continuing to inspire, and you guys are just amazing. But I do want to thank a few different folks for making this possible. First and foremost, Missouri S&T University, as well as the Center for Science, Technology, and Society. And more specifically, I want to thank Margaret Gribovitz for helping to make this possible. And of course, my bestie, Kate Shepard, for the initial invite and being the MC of this event. So what you're going to hear today is my talk with John McManus about World War II films over time. And one last thing, I do want to thank the people of Rolla for coming out as well. We sometimes forget that these universities are really the local universities. It's Missouri S&T, but it's really the University of Rolla in so many different ways. This is the school that represents the town, and the town is amazing and the school is amazing. So thank you all for coming out for that. I didn't want to forget about that. So that said, we have a really cool conversation with me and Dr. John McManus starting right now on Reckoning with Jason Herbert. My name is Jason Herbert. I'm a Southerner who lives in the West. I'm a historian, an outdoorsman, and a movie buff. I like finding new answers to old questions, and this is a reckoning.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. We are really lucky because we have two wonderful scholars here on campus. Dr. Jason Herbert is visiting. He works for the U.S. Forest Service, but his PhD is in history. Dr. Herbert is the host of Reckoning with Jason Herbert, but he also used to run a podcast, and he runs the weekly Historians at the Movies watch party every week. If you're on Blue Sky, it trends in the top 5 in the world every week. There's always a new movie. This week it is Goonies. It's on Sunday night at 8 o'clock. So if you're on Blue Sky, go look it up. It's fantastic and super fun. And then also, a lot of you know Dr. McManus, who is in the History and Political Science Department here on campus. And Dr. McManus is the host of Someone Talked, which is the official podcast of the D-Day Memorial, the National D-Day Memorial here in the United States. We got these two guys together beyond our better judgment. Just kidding. We're going to talk about It's called History Takes on the Movies. We're going to be, because I wrote the title and I like puns. Get it? Your face when I tell jokes. So they're going to be talking about sort of the evolution of World War II films over time, right? Because Dr. McManus is a military historian and Dr. Herbert is like a film historian. So we are recording this on audio, so hopefully they can use it on their podcast if they wish. So they're going to be speaking into the microphones. What they're going to do is they're going to talk for 35, 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to crowd questions. Okay, so think about questions and things because this is a really, to me, I think a rare opportunity to talk to two experts in these things. So let's welcome them and thank them.
Here's the weird thing about doing this. We have two podcast hosts who are supposed to talk to each other. So, and when we started this evolution, it's like, okay, let's talk about films in history, military films. Okay, how many thousands of films can we choose from? So it was very quickly like, oh, we've got to narrow this down to only 2,000 films.
Yeah, we narrowed it down to 2,000 that we'll be covering in depth. So get ready, get your pencils ready.
Your sleeping bags. We do have snacks.
Like everything that happened in the movie. God, that's so interesting, right?
Yeah, and there will be questions later.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a quiz.
Yeah.
Congratulations. So some of you are doing great already. You brought a notebook to a podcast? That's good.
That's good. That's good.
It's good. I said it was good.
All right, good.
All right, how do we kick this off? You want to be asked?
Yeah, I mean, so we wanted to talk a little about the evolution of these films and narrow it down to some, manageable number of 8, 10 films, but we don't have to restrict it to that. And of course, with your questions, it's fair game. I don't claim to know all these movies inside and out. I don't think you do either. But what interests me, of course, in these movies, certainly is the portrayal of history, how it comes across, the accuracy or lack thereof. As I often say, there's many reasons why people don't like to watch World War II movies with people like me. It's because I just ruin it for you and say, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Who wants that? I mean, that's kind of ponderous. But we can kind of get beyond that to talk a little bit about the cultural impact and kind of the human story of this too. And I think, one of the movies we were talking about, beforehand is Best Years of Our Lives. And so who here has heard of that movie? And no shame if you haven't. So there's a reason maybe why some of you haven't. It's an old movie. 1946, this movie came out. And it's way ahead of its time, though, because it portrays the very difficult adjustment of 3 World War II veterans in the immediate aftermath of the war when they're very young guys. And I really like from this standpoint is I don't know how many conversations I've had with people over the years about World War II veterans, and the theme of the conversation is often, they came home and they got on and they did great things and they left it behind, and I'm sorry, that's BS. They're like any veterans of any wars, that they had difficult adjustments. There were people who were never the same again, whose lives were shattered, whose lives were destroyed. Who fell by the wayside that you don't know as older people, at the end of the 20th century or something, who have had a great life. So there's a kind of confirmation bias there, but it also doesn't go, I guess, too dark of saying, okay, well, there's no future for these guys. The war has completely destroyed them and that's the end. It doesn't go on that route, which I think you tend to see with some sort of veterans immediate aftermath movies that come along later on that I can think of from the 21st century even too, like Thank You for Your Service, which is a good film, but also really kind of goes in some dark places. Best Years of Our Lives doesn't shrink from that, but it also leaves some kind of uplifting messages on some level too, maybe.
Yeah, for me, I had never seen Best Years of their lives of our lives until I went to college and took a World War II film class. Never even heard of it. Comes out in 46, like you're saying, right? Black and white film. And to this day, it remains my single favorite World War II film. It's just not even close. If you're into World War II, this is a film that you absolutely have to know, right? And it's interesting because it's a World War II film that is not in Europe. It's not in the Pacific. We don't see fighting, right?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating about this? First of all, gentlemen, Google Teresa Wright later. You're welcome. You'll thank me later. Okay. But I think the fascinating thing here is like this movie comes out in 46. So they're producing it at what, 45, ish,
Exactly.
something like that. And there's a recognition already after 4 years of warfare, right? You have to imagine that, wait a second, our boys are coming home, our men and women are coming home, remarkably changed by this experience. And for that story to get put out there right away tells me a lot about how Americans are grappling with society immediately after the war. And I think, John, the amazing thing about when you look at Best Years of Our Lives, right, is it absolutely complicates this history. We think about post-war America as this booming time, which America really takes its place as the dominant nation in the world, right? And things are great. Houses are going up. The economy's booming. Civil rights are completely solved. Everything is fine and good. But it's not.
No, it's
right?
definitely
It
not.
is a messy, ugly,
Very.
complicated affair on a very personal level.
And there's a lot of hand wringing in society at that point about how we are going to incorporate these veterans. Remember, there's 15 million people who serve in the course of World War II, and many of them are transitioning back to civilian life like that.
Yeah.
I mean, from 45 to 46, we are demobilizing, basically cutting our armed forces to the bone. And you have so many of these guys who are in that kind of netherworld of it's difficult maybe to leave behind what they just experienced, and they're not quite sure what's going to be ahead. And they're really, and the economy for a while is in a bit of a recession. And that had always been the concern, that you'd have something similar to what happened after World War I, where you had a pretty deep recession as veterans tried to adjust and all that too. Ultimately, of course, the economy does get better, but in this particular film, you're seeing these guys kind of struggle with where they're going to fit in that economy. So there's three guys, one who had been, I think, a Navy chief petty officer, and he's portrayed as a partially disabled veteran. He was a real veteran of World War II, and he had lost his hands in a training accident, I think. So he has like prosthetic limbs, like hooks. And so he thinks that his I guess it's his fiance or his girlfriend or something can never really want him. He just, it's very hard for him to wrap his mind around the fact that she would still see him as a whole man somehow. And she has to convince him, you know. And then you have another guy who's been a bombardier who's seen a lot of combat, and he comes home to a job we would think of today as a kind of kid's job. He's a soda jerk, as they called it back then. Nowadays, we call it a barista. You know, it's more or less the same kind of thing. And it's like, okay, where does this dude fit now? And then you have another guy who has sort of a respectable job at a bank. And so he's trying to, fit in with polite society too, in addition to the relationships too, like you were saying. You mentioned Teresa Wright. So expand on that.
Well, okay. And
She fits in.
So we've got our soda jerk who ends up dating Teresa Wright, who is the daughter of the guy who's trying to move up in society, right? So now you got all of these complications, right? And the amazing thing, I think, is really the casting of the guy who had lost, his hands during the war. We see him on screen. I believe he wins an Academy Award
He did.
For his performance.
Right.
The thing is, like, we're not shying. The film production is not shying away from this. You have to remember, right? The reason why films get made is to make money. These aren't documentaries. This is a thing that's going to come up over and over tonight, especially as we start talking about like fact versus fiction and the liberties filmmakers take whenever they make these films, right? These movies are made because studios are trying to make money. But I think it really says a lot that they weren't shying away from showing the real brutality and the grotesque nature of what happens to men and women during the war.
Yeah.
And I think there's another interesting thing you start to bring up here as far as these men and women who are coming back from the war, and they're going, especially the men who are coming back from the war. These guys are going back into taking jobs, right? Well, whose jobs are they taking? Who's doing the labor in the United States from 1941 to 1945? Well, it's women, right? So now you've got this whole divide now of women going back into the house after being the breadwinners of their homes, right? What stories are we telling there? And what's it like for that internal dynamic now, where the women are kind of giving their jobs up, sometimes unwillfully, right? So the men can go back to taking their natural space as leaders of the household. Like, what does that do to the economy? What does that do to internal dynamics, especially, and then relationships, right? As a husband or as a wife, what happens when you come home, or your husband or wife comes home from service overseas, having gone through these affairs that they had to see, and now they're trying to fit it. So there's also a very real natural story for the story of the mothers and wives and so forth who are greeting their loved ones as they come back, Now there's a whole other dynamic. So it's really this powerful story. It's really a center story of like what happens afterwards. It's fascinating that this film, one of the great films of World War II, but we never actually see World War II on screen. I just love
In that sense, it reminds me of 12 O'Clock High.
Please go
A
ahead.
movie about, combat in the air in World War II, in which you don't really see any combat. It's all about the dilemma of command and the morality of it and the stress and all those kinds of things. This too, Best Years of Our Lives, conveys the war without conveying the violence, but it's there. It's this undercurrent, it's constantly there, how these guys have been affected. And also too, they didn't make all three of these guys, hardcore combat soldiers or whatever, which also reflects the reality that the majority were not necessarily in combat, but that didn't mean they weren't changed. And that didn't mean there was an adjustment in the manner that, that you said, Jason. I mean, it's so how do you fit in domestically, and what happens with female employment? Because in many cases, it was not by volunteering that they gave up their jobs. This was the sort of gender reality of the time for many people, and so it butts up against that a little bit too, which I think is interesting for the time, and it did extremely well financially. So it paid off for them, so it shows that society, I guess, was interested in hearing the story to some extent.
Yeah. I have to, if you're into movies or you're into World War II or just this part of history, it's worth your time to sit and watch this film.
It is
easy to find, it's easy streaming. It is a magnificent, I tell you guys, I'd never seen before. I was like, I don't want to watch a black movie, right? It's so impossibly good. It's so good. We talked a little bit about the casting in this film, right? About the veteran. And I want to kind of go on a side mission real fast if I can, which is there's a guy who emerges out of World War II who becomes a Hollywood star. I'm talking about Audie Murphy, right? Some of you guys are nodding your heads, you know him. And so can we talk a little bit about Audie? Because I think there's a fascinating story here that talks about the men and women who served during this war. Some of them became heroes, and we know them by John Basilone, right? We know some of them by name to this day. Let's talk about Audie Murphy.
Audie Murphy is basically the stand-in for the American hero. That really appeals to Americana, the idea of an underdog who ends up as just somebody brilliant. Audie Murphy comes from a very impoverished background in Texas, a sharecropping background, I think. He is the classic kind of runt. And the Marines reject him because he's too small and too light and whatnot. He finds a place in the Army. He's in the 15th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, fights from Sicily all the way through to the end of the war. It's an incredible unit, by the way, that does a lodestone of a lot of the fighting in the war against Germany. And he ends up, by the end of the war, as he's often said, to be the most decorated American soldier in the war. And there's a great deal of truth to that. He gets the Medal of Honor. He gets the Distinguished Service Cross. He gets, I don't even know how many Silver Stars. He's commissioned from the field. And he is deeply affected by the war. His book, To Hell and Back, is definitely worth your time. He published published the book, I think, in the 50s. And it's a very unvarnished view of his combat experiences and how he's trying to deal with them. And then he becomes a movie star. So there's the other element of Audie Murphy's life. One of the reasons why he's so well known is by the 50s, he becomes this movie star, usually in Westerns, but he plays himself in To Hell and Back in 1956, right? And it's colored too, I think, if I remember correctly. So you don't have to worry about black and white with that one. And it's Hollywoodized a little bit, but it's also pretty darn good. So Audie Murphy had become this kind of stand-in for many people and having to carry that burden of being the hero. And he struggled deeply with PTSD. And he ultimately has a very tragic end. He died in a plane crash in 1971. He had been through, I think, 2 relationships, post-war relationships at that point. So, I mean, what do you think of To Hell and Back? I meant to ask you about that.
It's hard. I've only seen it a couple of times, right? For me, I look at this from maybe a little bit different standpoint to look at this and go, this is Audie playing Audie, and I'm just trying to think about this on a personal level. Like, what is this? What is this man? He's like when we tell our stories, right? When we tell a story of anything that we go through, whether it's something that happened to our dog that day or childhood memory, something like that, you're quite literally reliving those memories in your head, maybe in your heart, and so forth. So for him to go back and like make this film and relive this every single day as he's filming this thing, right? I can't,
For sure.
I don't know.
I mean, that could not have been easy for him.
No.
And I mean, that's what strikes me when I've seen that film, seen it probably a dozen and a half times. And just watching his facial expressions, watching his body language in the whole thing. If you've read his memoir and you've delved into Audie Murphy, you can kind of read between the lines a little bit. And I do think that particular movie took a bite out of him. I think it was helpful to him to kind of retreat into the fantasy world as all these other films, many of which are Westerns, and usually romances and this kind of thing. And he had this very homey appeal.
Yeah.
That was quite attractive to Americans, really of all backgrounds and races, not just whites. Audie Murphy was an everyman for World War II in the same way that another guy named Alvin York will be for World War I, who's a sort of Tennessee woodsman who becomes this sort of big hero who destroys the better part of an entire German battalion in the Battle of Argonne Forest and captures all these guys. And so Audie Murphy is often thought of in the same light. So as we get like to the 1960s, and they're thinking retroactively about World War II, and they kind of want to call up a World War II hero, Murphy becomes kind of the caricature for that on some level, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that Murphy goes off to star largely in Westerns, which at that point in time become like the big thing. You guys all know by now John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Clint Eastwood. It goes a little bit later and so forth, right? But Murphy's one of these. Murphy's one of these guys. I think it's kind of fascinating. You take a World War II hero, and Westerns at this point in time, in the 1950s and 60s, become so incrementally important to this re-mythologizing of what the United States is. And this is the thing you have to understand. Like after the World War II, the United States is very much involved in repainting its own legacy, right? And Murphy, this World War II hero, now becomes the cowboy, right? Who's out here to settle the West, to represent American expansion into the West. It's not an accident that he's out here doing this thing. Again, he's just a regular small guy that people can relate to. And he more people, I think a lot of people, I came to know him first as a Western star, watching him on the TV with my grandfather while I was on the couch, with my grandfather. So I don't think it's a surprise, that's the genre that he ends up going into and really kind of make his name.
And he's forever young, because he dies at age 46 or 47. He's buried at Arlington Cemetery. If you ever go there, his grave is very easy to access because it's close to a road that's right next to it. Very easy to park and look at it and give tribute to it. And I'd highly recommend that. A movie that would not have been made earlier, it comes out in 1967 that we were talking about is The Dirty Dozen, which is a total counterculture movie in relation to World War II. Then you have another one a couple of years later called Kelly's Heroes, which is in something in the same genre. But I'll tell you, The Dirty Dozen is darker on many levels. Don't you think? I mean, it's just like this is not made in 1947 or even 57. It's 67. You've seen The Dirty Dozen?
All right.
So many. I mean, I know these are old movies, but check them out because you'll be drawn in. You will.
I'm looking at several of you who've never heard of Lee Marvin, and that's a real problem for right now. Okay.
Lee Marvin would have a problem with it.
Lee Marvin would kick your ass.
He would have.
Not knowing that already, right? Jim Brown is in this movie. Running around dropping grenades on Germans, ladies and gentlemen. What else are you waiting for?
Yeah.
Right?
It's Donald Sutherland is in the movie too. And you may know him from the Hunger Games. He's much older, obviously, by then, but yes.
I'm not guessing they know who Telly Savalas is.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Check him out. Right? You know who he is.
Okay, 30 dozen crawled, walked, whatever. So Inglourious Bastards, right? It could run on. Yeah. We'll probably get into that here in a bit. But 30 Dozen is one of these foundational films. Have you seen Sleepless in Seattle? There's a great scene referencing
Jim Brown. I mean, I don't want to ruin the plot, but it is a very emotional thing. And
what can I ask you for a second? We're talking about some really heady stuff so far. We're talking about trauma, people coming back from the war. They're missing limbs. They're missing pieces of their soul, right? Dirty Dozen, not all of them come back at all, right? But these are heavy films dealing with warfare, Nazis, and also. Where's our comedies? You've been studying warfare for a long time. I cannot imagine that these young men and women who are overseas don't find humor in moments, right? Are there stories at all that come out that are Where are the comedies to tell are there moments here or
I think,
where's the idea of teaching telling World War II from a comedic standpoint?
Oh yeah, you definitely see that, and you see that at the time. I mean, Bill Malden, who's one of the leading cartoonists of the time, there's a lot of humor in his cartoons, and there's a lot of biting satire, as you can imagine. Mel Brooks is a World War II veteran. I really think World War II animates a lot of the rest of his career. You do have films like McHale's Navy that comes out and portrays the zanier side of World War II. But yeah, I think your point is a good one. That's not necessarily the default setting, is it? It's
No.
not necessarily something to joke about, at least in the view of many veterans at that time, I guess. But yeah, the Dirty Dozen. What strikes me about it is it's very counterculturist in the sense that it focuses on guys who have run afoul of the military justice system at the time, and they have all supposedly committed capital crimes, and they are on death row, and they're given an opportunity to redeem themselves with a special or kind of suicide mission, which is sort of during the run up to D-Day. And Lee Marvin plays I think a major lieutenant colonel.
Said Charles Bronson.
Yeah, Charles Bronson is in. He's a real veteran too. Marvin was a Marine veteran of World War II. We'll try not to hold that against him, but he was just this badass who was in all these movies, and so he plays this tough major trying to herd these convicts together. And Jim Brown is one of them. Donald Sutherland, Charles Bronson, Telly Savalas. I mean, on and on it goes.
Yeah, listen, if you were a badass, you got to be in this movie. That's what happened. Like you go back to watch it, just assume that they picked the 12 hardest dudes in America to be in this film. It is, but whatever. He's playing. But it also becomes this movie it becomes a guy film.
It is. It's a total guy film.
Dudes are bonding.
And it's the interesting thing too, from my standpoint as a historian, it's based on a real group, but there's a lot of artistic license taken with it. It's based on what's called the Filthy 13, which was a special demolition squad within the 101st Airborne Division. Jake McManus, a guy from Oklahoma, actually, who was sort of the key personality there and whatnot. But they were not convicts. The Filthy 13 in real life were not convicts, but they did run afoul sometimes of what they were supposed to be doing. But convicted? No, never convicted. That kind of thing. But they kind of the makers of the Dirty Dozen kind of took that whole Filthy 13 concept and then sort of grafted into this new setting. But what's interesting is that the kind of heroes of this movie are actually criminals in the military justice system of the time, and would not have been thought very highly of. And yet they become the heroes of the film, in terms of the risks they take and the training they do and all that. And there's moments of humor too.
I'll try not to cry right now.
It's hard not to, because it is the ultimate guy film, and it's very tragic at the end. And but there's such a funny scene in it where Donald Sutherland he plays this slovenly dude, and he's just not a very good soldier. And these guys have done their training, some of it, and there's this really strack unit that is doing everything the right way and standing for inspection, and they put Donald Sutherland up to playing like a general to inspect these guys, and they're all in perfect uniforms and inspection ready, and he's basically in fatigues, and he's just half what. And he's going through the line, inspecting these guys. And then he asks the guy where he's from. And he says, Moberly, Missouri. And Southern Pause says, never heard of it. And the guy's just totally deflated. It's just such a comic relief scene when you're like, usually in these movies, the heroes are the guys who are all strack and everything. In this case, it's Donald Sutherland's character who's just this, complete outcast on some level.
Can I ask you, there are no shortage of men and women who come out of this conflict who are legendary, right? Some of whom become presidents and so forth.
Yeah.
Where are our biopics? We've got Patton, right? And we've got a few other made-for-TV movies and stuff like that. But it's surprising to me, John, that we don't really have our big screen Eisenhower.
Right? Because Eisenhower was too real, I guess, because he had been president. Yeah.
I've made this argument. It's the reason why we don't have a Theodore Roosevelt film. It's almost unassailable to go out to talk about this. But we didn't see John Bassem until Pacific.
Right.
And even then it's not focused necessarily on him the entire time, right? But we've got Patton. What do you think Patton does? Because when Patton's come out in the 70s, correct?
Patton comes out in 1970, and this is so interesting because obviously that's when the Vietnam War has gone quite sideways. A lot of people have soured on it by then. There's a lot of anti-war sentiment, and yet you couldn't make a movie about anybody who's more pro-war than George Patton, for gosh sakes, you know? So all of that comes out of a couple of things, and just in my opinion. Patton had been very media friendly during the war. I'd never seen an Army commander who had so many press conferences. And so he was very well known. He was colorful. He gave great copy. He was obviously a very successful commander. And he was relatable on a human level too, in the sense that he had this very mushy emotional side. An example, after the war, he comes home for a brief tour, like a war bonds tour. And I kind of, I'm the hero, I'm George Patton tour in June 1945. And it was not at all unusual for him at ceremonial dinners to basically break down and weep. And so here's like the hard guy, George Patton, also has this very squishy side that many people could relate to. Omar Bradley was his frenemy from our own state. And he ends up, his second marriage is to a woman who was basically a Hollywood writer and producer. And Omar Bradley had observed George Patton for the better part of their whole lives. And so he really had, I think, a passion for telling Patton's story as he would see it through his lens. So fair warning, the movie is not necessarily very accurate on many levels, and it's kind of Bradley's view of Patton on some level. And you see Bradley in the movie, played by Carl Malden, who I think his real name was Solulovich or something. And so in every movie Malden was in, he would try and work that name in. And so you'll hear him in the movie Patton mention that name Solulovich or something like that. So the Patton movie, when it comes out, appeals to that still kind of mainstream pro-war American culture that's the kind of the hard hat culture that Nixon's silent majority or whatever. And it's Nixon's favorite movie. He's watching it constantly when he launches the invasion of Cambodia in 1970. So art, impacting events. So why don't we have more biopics? I think in some ways it's because the main character, Eisenhower, becomes president, so we already think we know him somehow. Yeah. And Patton becomes this colorful dude to focus on. You have a MacArthur movie later on, which is straight up awful. I'm sorry. This is the late 70s. And MacArthur's played very well by Gregory Peck. You have a very, very bad MacArthur movie that comes out in 2006, played by Tommy Lee Jones, in which he plays this incredibly profane MacArthur. MacArthur did not use profanity. That was his thing. So I don't know what kind of research they did for that, but here again, a historian ruining the whole thing for you. But other biopics, I mean, there just aren't a lot.
Not there. And so we talk about Patton being 7, right? The height of Vietnam, right? It's 1970. And then it seems, correct me if I'm wrong here, we just had it feels to me like our World War II films just kind of get overshadowed as we start to think more and more about Vietnam in the years really, I mean, at that point in time, moving forward all the way through the 80s. Now, I'm a child of the late 70s. I grew up in the 80s. So much of our culture in that time period was really about wrestling with Vietnam, whether you watch it in film, whether you watch a TV show, music, right? Everybody's heard Born in the USA, like all of this stuff. And then there's this movement in 1998, and there are 2 films specifically that come out. You want to talk about those and like what those do to world, how we start to remember World War II?
It's such a before and after kind of thing. 2 movies come out in 1998, World War II movies, Saving Private Ryan. Maybe you've heard of it. I don't know. It comes out in July of that year. Thin Red Line came out around Thanksgiving. And so that's the other one. And so Thin Red Line is perpetually in the shadow of Saving Private Ryan for that reason, but also because it's the Pacific. And the Pacific is always in the shadow of Europe in World War II and in our popular memory of it. But I don't think there's any question that Saving Private Ryan completely affects war filmmaking.
Not just
forever after.
Film, right? But just
all films. The expectation of how combat is portrayed, all of that. I mean, it's a tectonic shift in that regard. And it doesn't mean it's all accurate. Again, I could sit up here tonight and ruin the whole thing for you, like in all these films. But it does mean that it is conveying a kind of graphic nature to the fighting that you would not necessarily have seen in a 1949 movie or even the shaky camera, the bleeding out some of the color, the gore of some of it, some of the taking actors and trying to give them military style training so that their movements are correct, so that they know their weaponry, so that they understand something of what it takes to reach your physical limits and all these kinds of things. And of course, to the credit of these actors, Tom Hanks and the others, they're the first ones to say, we're just playing at this. We're not the real thing. But it does give us something of the taste of this. And that does shine through on films. And so that for any good war film after, that becomes kind of the expectation. Now, you also had this, by the way, before this in a movie called Platoon. So that comes out in 1986 and 87, and it portrays Vietnam, circa 67 and 68. Oliver Stone, who is a real Vietnam veteran and an infantry veteran of the war, and that is an important qualification because the majority were not out in the field in a combat setting or whatever. He was. And so he took his guys, Charlie Sheen and all the others, and trained them up with a guy named Dale Dye, he's a Vietnam veteran. He makes it his business to make more realistic films alongside the directors. So this becomes the expectation, and then Dye trains the Saving Private Ryan crew a decade later. And I just think when you see a movie that has that kind of loving preparation, it totally shows versus the others. You can just tell like that in the movements, in the way they hold their rifles, the way their uniforms are on, all kinds of things you can just spot easily, I think. And so I do think that shows. And in Thin Red Line, Terrence Malick had something of the same dedication to it, not on the same level, but I think it also too that you do see some of the attention to detail there.
Yeah, it seemed to really. I have to imagine my own take on this thing is like, I think by 1980, and again, this is a pre 9/11 world, right? And we have to remember a lot of filmmaking now in the context not only of Saving Private Ryan, but also in the context of 9/11 and what changes in the way the United States looks at its position in the world as a result of this film. And you're going to see a lot of films. Kingdom of Heaven, right, which is about the Crusades, is not about the Crusades, right? It is absolutely a response to 9/11. But it's a massive change in the ways that we look at stuff. But I also think that there's times like, I think American cinema had kind of grown tired of talking about Vietnam and was ready to go back to seeing the United States as this great, victoric, heroic space. Yep. And you see that in the films that kind of come out, beginning, say, in 98. But John, I have a real quick question for you, and I'm hoping you can relate here, because we're talking about all these stories and all these men fighting and all these things, right? Where are the women? Like, there are women in World War II serving the nation, serving multiple nations, right? Doing some really amazing stuff, but we don't see them on film. What's up with that?
They're sort of anonymous and forgotten and overlooked, and not just women, African Americans too. Saving Private Ryan, for all its greatness, does not portray the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. There's an African American unit that's also there at Omaha Beach. In addition, of course, women aren't going to be portrayed because they're not in on the assault, but it's a question of focus though too. There is a movie that comes out, I think during or right after World War II, and I apologize, I'm blanking on the title, but it portrays the female nurses on Bataan who actually were there, that's true, and were captured by the Japanese. It's not an accurate movie in that it portrays the women actually fighting the Japanese in combat and getting killed. And fortunately, all of the nurses survived the war, although their captivity was really difficult. And they came home as major heroes. The mantle of hero-ness or whatever that Audie Murphy carried, to a lesser extent, they carried that too. So you do see an attempt at filmmaking there. But in most of these World War II movies, if there are women involved, it's usually, like Spy with the French Resistance, like in The Longest Day, for instance. And that's just kind of injected into the story in a way by the director. But or the love interest of someone going into combat, like Pearl Harbor. I hate to even mention that movie.
Ask that later.
Or the Sands of Iwo Jima would be another example. I mean, there's a number of examples, but again, that portrays that reflects the kind of gender realities that go through this whole thing. Now, you eventually are going to have a movie called Swing Shift. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. It's kind of obscure. Came out in the 80s, I think, which does attempt to portray female war workers and all that. I think, is Goldie Hawn in that movie? I think, yeah. So it does exist, but there's just, no comparison. But also, too, I'll say this, maybe out of some understanding for filmmakers, like, Jason, you said, I mean, they're trying to make money, and combat films and portrayal of combat makes money, and women were generally not in combat, or at least not supposed to be, and so that's a factor too, but it's just the reality of inequality that is reflected on film.
Yeah, I think maybe, I'm thinking immediately right now about the women I've seen on film regarding, say, World War II. And I'm thinking about the Band of Brothers kind of trilogy, if you will, right? In which we do start to see that they never become the central characters, but at least we see John Basilon's wife.
Yeah, right.
We see Eugene Sledge's family. We see mothers and daughters and caretakers. We see Band of Brothers, the French nurse, and so forth. Like, we start, and I'm wondering if maybe that's just a case because we've got a longer format. We're trying to tell these larger stories we can expand, and we're not under the pressure of like trying to make the Hollywood hit in 2 hours.
Yeah, right.
And do so. So it's a bit frustrating when you're a historian and want to talk about these incredibly important gender and sexual dynamics that happen in warfare, because women's stories are super important, as are Native voices. And we haven't talked about Native people in cinema, right?
I mean, you get wind talkers, don't you? I mean, I know. I hate to even bring it up.
It's so impossibly bad.
It is. It's
So
awful.
I was just visiting with Comanche Nation 2 weeks ago. So Nape apologizes, guys, if you're listening in, for having to bring up this film, right? It's good that they try to tackle it. But do we see Native people talked about very often in World War II films? It's
very seldom.
It's quite usually a very white, very male story. And that's kind of a running thing for, I don't know, last 60, 70 years.
Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, and until, like Miracle at St. Anna. I mean, until that comes out. When is that? I mean, like, that's 20 years ago or something. It's a Spike Lee movie that portrays African-American soldiers from the 92nd Infantry Division in Italy. And it's got a whole plot to it. It's not just about race, but it is too, on some level too, because the film starts with a veteran of that division watching The Longest Day and seeing the white soldiers portrayed The Longest Day and saying, we were there too. But they're not the only ones too, because I'll just tell you a little anecdote about a colleague of mine, a Canadian colleague, Mark Milner, who's a remarkable Canadian World War II historian. And his father was a veteran of D-Day. And so Mark remembered as a child going to see that movie with his father, taking him and all of his friends. They're all primed up for it. And then you really don't see any Canadians at all. And his father was very ticked off. And he said those exact words after the film to Mark and his buddies, said, we were there too. And so it becomes the sort of add-on that we look at it this way in this day, I hope more fair-minded. But, back then, not at all. I mean, it's the lens of the time. And even in a film as cutting edge as Saving Private Ryan, it's probably never occurred to Steven Spielberg to think about just portraying somebody from the 320th being in the mix on Omaha Beach or something, just out of, not out of any political correctness, but just out of fully representing what actually happened and who was there at the time, But it's easy for us to criticize too, because they're juggling a lot of balls.
There are all these other, we talk about the tension between, say, men and women, or Native voices, African-American voices, other folks, Asian American voices fighting in the Pacific as well. Then, of course, there's this whole other tension of like, who are we showing, Europe versus the Pacific? Are we talking about the land war? Are we talking about ocean combat? Are we talking about the war for the skies? There's all this kind of stuff, right? But I think maybe the best thing to do might be just to kind of start opening this up to kind of questions and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I really kind of want to hear what you got. I want us to talk about the stuff you guys want to hear about, right? So maybe we can just kind of start with that. Anyone but the Marines.
Yeah, exactly. No Marines allowed.
John, can I see it here so that we can travel with it?
Please do. So let everybody see.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
You'll be able to speak into that.
All right, sir.
Who'd you call on? Okay.
And state your name for us, please.
I'm Caden.
You're good.
And I have a thing I've always wondered that recently, or more recently, we've been seeing movies like The Imitation Game, like Oppenheimer, which are subjected around World War II, but are set away from combat lines and more on like projects. So I was curious for both of you, if there's any section of World War II that does not involve combat that you would really want to see a movie production about.
Ooh. You have all night. This isn't glamorous, but I would like to see a movie that portrays, the poor schlubs who had to build airfields all over the world. Aviation engineers, Navy Seabees, but I prefer Army aviation engineers for obvious reasons. But they were all over the world, and they're doing all this unglamorous construction work. It's like ultimate civil engineering kind of stuff. But it's just so incredibly important for the moving of supplies, for the enforcement of the American standard of living, which American service people expected. And it took a heck of a lot of work. I think you could probably come up with some interesting plot lines and human interest stories, because obviously there's a lot of interactions with locals and wherever they were. I would like to see that kind of unsung part of the war portrayed. Will it ever happen? Not a chance, in my view.
I want to joke and tell you that, the story I want to hear about these roving bands of rogue renegade historians who go around talking about movies and so forth. Dashing, I think, a little bit, you fine. Rosie the Riveter, man, talk to me about the women who made this war freaking possible, right? Where are the women on these stories, right? I want to talk about these people, right? We don't see it because they're out there kicking so much ass, doing what they do, and they're balancing all, because they're raising the families, and they have no freaking clue if their loved ones are coming. The dynamics, the internal tension of these women who are sending away their mother, or their husbands, their sons, right, their brothers to these wars. This war was fought at home as well, right? This is the home front is a war front. These stories need to be told. So I think it's prime. I think it's probably prime for a series like we've seen.
Could definitely be a series.
Be a thing that I would love to see.
For sure.
I would go for absolutely.
Priority, because I'm holding the microphone. A League of Their Own is a World War II movie.
Absolutely.
So, and those women were doing, it shows a lot of losing your spouse, right? But you finding out you lost your spouse right before a game. And then right after that, I'm going to ruin it for everybody. And then right after that game, right, the main character, her husband comes back. And so how do you deal with, leaving your dream of playing professional baseball? Well, we want to go have kids because Bob came home, kind of thing. So
yeah, great point.
Thank you.
It's a good movie.
Thank you.
I saw Larry, and then I'll get Chris.
Let her be. She gets the charge.
Oh, sorry. I just took over. Shocker. Everybody's surprised.
Thank you. I'm Larry Gregg. I heard one consistent theme from Jason: movies are made to make money.
Yeah.
I heard one consistent theme from John: almost all of them are historically inaccurate. So if I take the two themes, there's entertainment value from movies. What other value is there?
Well, whether we like it or not, a lot of people get their history from movies,
Absolutely.
from popular culture and or TV or video of some sort, and so I do think there's value in that when there are, when history is portrayed well. It doesn't always have to be 100% accurate, but if you're conveying the spirit of something, you're conveying the human issues, the experience. Who knows what it could be? I think that it is an amazingly compelling way to present history to all of us. And you all know, those of you who know me in this room, I believe history is for everybody. And I think film is one tool that can take us toward that greater understanding. So me looking at it just as an historian, I'm not thinking as a film producer of how we make money. We got to have a love interest here, or we've got to, show this here, there, whatever. I'm thinking about in terms of what I think will promote a better historical understanding. So I love the genre. I think it's great. So I think it has tremendous value, because I think too, for the good movies, the more you learn of the history, the more you get out of those movies too, because you see the layers, and there's things you didn't notice before that now you do because you know more. So I think it can be very nuanced, and I just think it can be a really kind of human, compelling way to study the past.
So I'm going to name drop here, right? I had Ed Zwick on the podcast. Ed, as you probably know, was director of Glory. I think easily the best Civil War film ever made. Director of a whole bunch of World War II film, Defiance, right? Which does
really
take some
good
liberties,
films,
right? Great film,
Yeah.
right? But I asked Ed, I was like, how do you make these decisions when you need to stray away from reality, right? Or stray away from what happened? And he was incredibly gracious to talk about this, right? And he said this, he was like, there are certain necessary truths that you're trying to tell, right? That's all, as a filmmaker, that's what he's trying to get to, especially as a Jewish man telling a story like of Jewish people in World War II who were fighting against the Holocaust. This was a very close film for him when he was talking about making the film Defiance, right? But he had to like, there were certain battles in the film that never actually took place and so forth. He's like, look, the audience is expecting a certain thing. And, you know, you've got to deliver that level to them so that they stay in the seat and they learn the bigger picture. Because ultimately, the movie is not about, okay, at this battle, these things happen, right? It is about the heroism of people who found a way to survive in the midst of their own Holocaust, right? So that's really what they're trying to do. And I think as historians, for those who are taking history classes and stuff like that, it's on you when people start talking, it's like, oh yeah, that movie's really cool. And here's some stuff you can learn from it. I'm not interested in what a friend of mine, Dr. Waitman Bourne, he calls it ribbon counting.
Yeah,
You know?
Waitman.
No, wait.
Oh, he's a
Oh,
great guy.
hey, he came on to do Fury.
Yeah.
Right? Oh,
Did he?
he's great friend. I
Great
love
guy.
him. Wade calls it ribbon counting.
Yeah.
We're just not interested in saying, okay, this happened and this, hold on, and then this happened. Like, not interested in that at all. It's like,
Shouldn't be.
we can curate, and we can also say, hey, look, this movie's a pile of shit. You just don't even watch that midway. But other films, yeah, then we can kind of say, yeah, okay, they're taking some liberties here, and here's why.
Yeah, right.
I mean, but they're not documentaries, stories. You know, go in there, go have a good time. I guess that's what I.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
That was not a plan.
So you say.
Okay, I do want to make sure when you talk about Midway not being a good movie, you mean the 2019 Midway, not the 1975 Midway, right? Okay, that's what. And I was going to mention Guns of Navarone has women in it in a prominent role, as does its sequel. But those are, I would, of course, say by far the outliers at the time. So I'm going to ask a very pedantic question: favorites and least favorites.
I'll take it. I'll take
Go
it.
ahead.
I said it earlier, best years of our lives, without question for me. Again, gentlemen, Teresa, right? I saw some of you nodding your heads over. Good on you. Best years, it just changed the way I look stuff. Das Boot.
That's good.
You guys seen that film, right? You're gonna be claustrophobic by the end of it. That is a hard watch.
Darn good.
It's phenomenal, right? And it's interesting because you're seeing the war from a completely different perspective. Midway, I found the newest version of Midway, I thought was just unwatchable. It was so obviously raw, pro-American. It was just gross. Not a fan of Pearl Harbor, which was trying too hard to be Titanic. I mean, it was just. Oh, and I got Red Tails, awful film. If you want to learn about the Tuskegee Airmen, go watch a Tuskegee Airmen show that was on HBO. That's I mean, I wanted Red Tails to be good. George Lucas, right? It was just
such a mistake.
It was a bunch of quotes clipped together to make it. It was just don't. We've done most of those films on the watch party over the last 7 years, and Red Tails was like, I had thousands of people on the internet at the same time going, why did you make us watch this hunking pile of shit? So, yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. I think I'll just talk about my least favorite. Battle of the Bulge is absolutely terrible. It's just awful. I mean, the movie comes out in 1965 and you're using the wrong tanks? Seriously? I mean, how many Shermans are there in play at that point? You know, I mean, loads. Get your hands on them, you know, if you're going to portray armor in combat. And don't, you know, take this random intel officer, First Army, and try and make him, you know, the greatest prophet since Isaiah or something. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. Henry Fonda's character predicting the whole thing and knew it all along. I mean, it's just so bad on so many levels. And the way the combat is portrayed is so inauthentic. I mean, don't even get me started. Pearl Harbor, I mean, it's just a stinking morass. I'm sorry. It's just everything about it is just rotten to the core. I'm sorry. It's a bad film. There's another film from another war that I just don't like on so many levels, and I know that a lot of people will disagree with me. Apocalypse Now is just so distorted and so not really about Vietnam. It's so about Heart of Darkness, which, okay, that's great if we want to get into the philosophical morale issues of war or whatever. But if you're trying to tell me that
Here's my philosophy.
you're trying to tell me that Cruise water skied in Vietnam. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just so absurd on so many levels. So it's a good filmmaker who kind of went off the rails in terms of historical accuracy and had to be brought back to the world of reality by what I think is maybe a better filmmaker in Oliver Stone in Platoon. And another one called Hamburger Hill, by the way, which is written by an actual Vietnam veteran as well. And so that's where you see the difference there. Apocalypse Now is made by the people who never went to Vietnam, who thought they knew something about it and were going to make this film that they thought would be so compelling, and it is to a lot of people. Those other movies I just mentioned were about people who really were in Vietnam and knew what they were talking about. And then I think their art holds up a lot better for me as an historian. So I had to get that off my chest if we're talking about the bad.
Listen, we can turn this into a Vietnam show real fast. Because Platoon and Hamburger Hill coming out in 86 and 87 respectively really kind of changed the game in which we were talking about Vietnam as well. So
really do.
But if you haven't had a chance to see either of those films, watch them both.
Yeah,
Watch them both. And the score, especially Platoon.
Adagio for strings.
I can't. Listen. I can't look at Willem Dafoe. I can't see Willem Dafoe in any other road. And Tom Berenger.
Yeah, and Tom Berenger was incredible.
And then seeing him and Charlie Sheen in Major League afterwards.
Yeah.
It's weird.
I know. And that was only a couple years later. Major League came out in 1989. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
All right. So
I've got the mic.
Baseball World War II. All right.
So before Saving Private Ryan was Schindler's List, of course, and it's another World War II one. And but it also made me think, what movies told, because most of what you've talked about are movies told from the American soldier's perspective. But what about the British films? What about Churchill biopics? What about those sorts of things? What are your favorite movies there, or what can we learn from
I think I think Battle of Britain. Battle of Britain. Have you seen it?
No.
Battle of Britain comes out in 1969, and so it's what it is. Isn't it amazing? It's the right aircraft. It's the pilots are portrayed correctly. The airfields, the setting, the whole plot line follows history to a great extent. It's just so faithful to what happened without getting too deep into the weeds of like what Waitman said, the rivet counting and all that. It finds that sweet spot. The cinematography is just beautiful. And another movie I think of, made by the same people who made Das Boot, is Stalingrad, the 1993 Stalingrad, not the other one that comes out later that's basically just a CGI thing, and not Enemy at the Gates, which is questionable on many levels, but compelling. Stalingrad, the one that comes out in 93, is legitimately hardcore and I think a very, very compelling film. I don't know, what do you think?
I got two bridges for you. River Kwai, Bridge on the River Kwai, and a Bridge Too Far. Right. Yeah. Those are two. I mean, those are two films, and I don't know the production values and so forth, but they do expand at least the war when we're talking about it to British points of view and so forth. So we see a lot of that. A Bridge Too Far is 75 hours long. Because it's got the biggest cast in Hollywood history. It's like, but everybody you've ever heard of is in that film. It's like, oh, here's Robert Redford, right? Here's Sean Connery. It's like everybody's in this movie. It's crazy. Those are, I guess, maybe two of the films.
Bridge Too Far, I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah,
Richard Attenborough made incredible movie on many levels because like the jump scenes, real jumpers, real planes, real World War II equipment, real drop zones, all of that.
Real disaster.
And in terms of who they got to play all these various parts, interesting little nugget about that. So one of the characters portrayed is James Gavin, who's the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, played by Ryan O'Neal, who I think just died last year, if I'm not mistaken. But was very much a heartthrob in the 1970s as Robert Redford, who plays Julian Cook, a battalion commander within Gavin's division. So Jim Gavin was in on like the advising for the film. And one of the things he wrote about later privately is he was very disappointed in the casting of Ryan O'Neal as him. And he's like, this guy so isn't me. He didn't want to see himself as Ryan O'Neal. And he liked the movie, but he always kind of held back on the movie because he didn't like the person who played them. I mean, how many times do you hear that? And they got along fine, but he privately just thought, this dude is not all that. He is not, an airborne guy.
Can I ask you another question before we jump in? The use of counterfactuals. We brought up Inglourious Basterds earlier. I think a lot of people in this room have seen that film wildly deviating from the reality What are your thoughts on like taking a movie,
I mean-
using World War II and just make it like it's a borderline comedy at times, right? What are your thoughts about
I think
Bastards?
there's other things to be comedic about.
Okay.
Rather than taking these real people and real events and turning them into this Quentin Tarantino show of some sort.
Mm.
This is a joke between many of my friends and me, how much I thoroughly hate that movie. Because of the reasons I just said. It's just because, unfortunately, some people are going to go to a movie and they think then that's World War II. They don't quite get the sort of tongue in cheek that's there. That Tarantino, a very brilliant filmmaker, that he's got all along, how it's kind of a caricature and how that's a commentary on many other things. And of course, the movie is very compelling and it's fun on some levels. But I still think it just sort of takes the butcher block to history and uses it as its little prop to do these other things. So for someone maybe more as literal minded as I am, I guess, I don't like it.
Sure.
But I understand why it's compelling, why the acting is, of course, amazing. Speaking of Brad Pitt's in that one, we didn't talk about Fury. We were going to talk about that one.
Yeah,
That could
if you
be
guys want to ask
perfect,
Fury
but
questions, we're down.
Yeah, if there's Fury questions,
Somebody ask Fury questions.
except Rivet Hank questions. But other than that,
My man crush on Brad Pitt will continue. So
Hi, I'm William. So, what do you two think is the most consistent thing that these war movies, maybe even the good ones, get wrong that you think is important that they get right?
This is a great question.
great question.
Outstanding question. Listen, an easy critique would be to say to focus on like American stories alone, right? But you only have 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours to tell a story. And Americans want to hear about American stories. Canadians want to hear about Canadian stories, and Australians want to hear about Australians. That makes sense. I think that there's a danger sometimes when we tell these stories, like a thing like World War II, or even say the American Revolution, to focus on the United States as the sole actor in this engagement, right? The United States played a big part in this war, obviously, but not the only part in the war. I would certainly love to see, more stuff with Canadians and so forth, right? Can I handle the accents for 2 hours? I don't know what you're talking about. So, I think maybe that's that's a little bit of the dangers and also they start to turn these stories. When we talk about World War II and so forth, the United States emerges as the victor, and we've defeated Nazis, and we've defeated the Empire of Japan, and everything comes home and it's fine, but it's not. The United States is about to go through a nasty civil rights era. We've been fighting through that since the Civil War, right? There are all these problems that are going to come home. Okay, Emmett Till's going to be lynched in 1955, right? 10 years after the end of the war. Right? These are real problems, So there's a danger in thinking just because we won the war, right? Things are going to be fine, and things will be fine forever. In fact, that was a big part of the arguments against the United States. They're saying the United States is all about freedom and all this shit. Look at what's going on back home, right? So I think there's a danger in assuming that the United States was always going to be the good guy, so forth. We're about to go into Vietnam in a few years after this, right? Is assuming the United States is always going to be seen as the heroic part in the United States. And I don't mean to take anything away from the men and women who were in this war, but it's like what happens next is really, really complicated. That's the reason why I take these history classes to start to unravel this stuff. So I think there's that.
Yeah, I mean, so mine is a little more deep into the weeds in terms of like combat films and portrayal of combat. And I think this is just the ultimate kind of divergence between art and reality. I mean, the viewer has to be shown something and has to have something intelligible on the screen to follow. And what that usually means is you're going to see a lot more in a movie than you really would in an actual like World War II combat setting. What I mean by that is, you could go through the whole war as a combat soldier and never really lay eyes on the enemy, a live enemy, I'm saying, unless you're capturing them, or a dead enemy, who's just been killed probably by your artillery rather than your rifles. And I think in film, you can't operate that way. You've got to have people packed closer together than it really would be in real life because they're supposed to spread out. But I mean, how are you really going to get that on camera when Jason and I are supposed to be 20 yards apart or something, and there's 100 of us, right? So that's just the inevitable reality of it. But I think some of the best films do capture that little sense of disorientation of like looking around and saying, where did that shooting come from? What's next? The Thin Red Line, an example I'd give you there is, they're working through these grasslands with tall grass and whatnot, and their lead scouts are going forward and they're picked off by snipers like that. You have no idea where the snipers are. You don't know what's going on, where any of this is, and you just kind of see the sun move through, the shadows over the grass. And I think there's a real truth in that. But I don't think you see that enough in enough war-oriented films. And I think just by the nature of it, I'm not really criticizing filmmakers because they've got to give you the lens of that story. And who would want to sit there for 2 hours being disoriented and like, what am I looking at? Where you've got to focus the story somehow. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But I do think sometimes the better filmmakers can find a way to kind of adjudicate that a little bit.
Get my Carlos Hathcock.
Oh yeah,
Sure, some-
Carlos Hathcock, sniper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch him. The opposite.
Hayden, your friend is asking a question.
Hi, I'm Caleb Schwenk. On the topic of like movies and shows like Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, where they brought in Dale Dye with more recent movies, where do you feel like historical movies are going in terms of the next couple of years?
This isn't a prediction. This is a hope. What I hope is that you're going to see a real spate of good movies about the 21st century Muslims. We just had one called Warfare that came out just this past year, which portrays the fighting of SEALs in Ramadi, Navy SEALs in Ramadi, and is incredibly well done. I would like to see that. We're 15 years beyond, soon it'll be 20, 25, and I think that we're kind of ready for some of those authentic stories. I don't even mean just the combat stories. I mean the other side, the human stories on many, many levels, even the political stories of how things came to be and whatever. So I'm not predicting that, but this is what I would like to see, this person.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that, right? And that makes sense because films came out in the wake of Vietnam. They come out in the wake of World War II, right? We've kind of been addressing those conflicts for a long time, so it makes sense. We're talking now Gulf War, War on Terror, things like that. As a scholar of early America, I'm dying to see a decent Revolutionary War film because the Patriot ain't it. So I mean, I would love to see something like that because there's some fascinating stories I think that can be told there.
For sure.
So I'd love to, but we're going to continue to see stuff contemporarily, and eventually I think there'll be a swing back to start revisiting some of these other stuff.
Maybe, and I don't think World War II will ever go away. Too, I think it's so compelling. So many people are into it. It's so important. I think it'll probably endure. Just my opinion.
So you guys mentioned Fury, so I'll bite that bait. Brad Pitt's character in Fury he's kind of a very nihilistic leader in a lot of ways, and I'm kind of in my mind comparing that to almost like Harwood Lipton from Band of Brothers. So in World War II films, which one or what leadership qualities would be the most accurate in something like an NCO specifically? Is it more along the lines of Brad Pitt or something more along or Brad Pitt's character, or is it something more along the lines of a Lipton or other characters like that?
I would say much more Harwood Lipton.
Great question.
I mean, Don Collier, who Brad Pitt plays, you're right. He's an incredibly hardcore kind of dude. Too much so. I mean, there's a scene in the movie where he forces one of his soldiers to execute a POW who, I mean, that's kind of Hollywood over the top. If an NCO operated that way, it'd be hard for that person to continue in that position, I think. But Harwood Lipton, just in case you don't know who that is, he's one of the real people portrayed in Band of Brothers. Harwood Lipton came from West Virginia, and for him, this is an interesting kind of trend line in World War II, and something of where we do get the kind of gauzy memory of the war, is that for some people, the war really was a leg up on some level, who came from some tough backgrounds, and military service made them healthier physically in terms of getting better food, getting benefits, getting money, and launching them to good post-war careers. And Harwood Lipton is one of those people. He had a very successful post-war career. And his Army career, he goes from basically being private to being a first sergeant to getting commissioned in the field. So he's really a natural leader on many levels. He's played by Donnie Wahlberg, who I think is a fine actor. And he's portrayed very, very well, very faithful to who Harwood Lipton was. So he in Band of Brothers, you see him in the kind of leadership where he has a rapport and knows everybody in the unit. He knows their strengths and weaknesses, and he works through interpersonal. Don Collier, I think, works a little bit more through just his incredible dedication and proficiency to being a tank commander. He's an outstanding tank commander on so many levels. And he's inspirational. And in the end, you do see him as somebody who can hold this group together quite well. But I think you're right, Caden, that he's the way he's portrayed is so hardcore. I think that's a little Hollywoodish, and you wouldn't necessarily have lasted that long as an NCO. But just my opinion.
I think Collier is almost this shy of Sergeant Barnes.
Almost.
Platoon. I mean, like, because Barnes at the moment Platoon was right, and then just like he's hyper proficient, but he's got the dark. The whole line in Fury is like, you won't believe what this war will do to him, right? And that's we see that in his character, right?
We do. Good point.
All right. First, I want to echo your point. I want the Joseph Plum Martin American Revolutionary War movie, or I want the Johnny Burgoyne movie. I think that would be hilarious and awesome. But I want to kind of maybe do it more on the film side, because we've obviously made reference to some of the major World War II films that have been made by Steven Spielberg, right? He's, made it, like, he was involved with Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, and has made a lot of other war movies about other subjects as well, right? Or other wars. And so I'm wondering, because Spielberg is such an influential filmmaker in general, like, what do you think Spielberg's influence might be on war movies at large? Or what would you say about sort of his body of war movies?
Oh, they're incredible. I mean, Empire of the Sun is another one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that came out in '87, I think. And it's based on a memoir, fascinating memoir by a guy named Ballard, I think, who was a British national, and he was a child during the war in China, and ends up in basically an incarceration camp for Allied civilians. And so you see that side of the war. 1941 is another movie. We were talking about comedies, played with John Belushi in a key role in that movie. I mean, Steven Spielberg can't get World War II out of his system, I think, on some levels. And I understand why, because his father was a World War II veteran, and it was, and I think to Steven Spielberg, I don't know him personally, but my impression is he feels that this is obviously a seminal moment in the Jewish experience too, which is a big part of what informs his growing up in his life. As far as his influence, I mean, I think certainly on the combat side, I mean, Saving Private Ryan influences everything that comes after, including Band of Brothers, too, which is made by much the same way. And then the Pacific, and even Masters of the Air that comes out later on, and every other war film that's been made since. But in terms of Schindler's List, too. I mean, anything that's come out about the Holocaust since has had to have that as something of a reference point,
Yeah, it's amazing actually when you look at how, and I want to speak to the history of film for a quick second, right? The two, Steven Spielberg has released these two seminal moments in film history. One is with Jaws in 1975, which alongside Star Wars in 77 forever changes how the world goes to the movies. It creates the summer blockbuster, and it starts first with Spielberg's Jaws, and then Star Wars comes in and goes. But it's first with Jaws. Right. But absolutely, 1998, there is a very real line in the sand, not just World War II films, with war films forever. Go look at them. You can look at Enemy at the Gates. You can look at any number of films that come after this thing. Every single one of them, almost every single one of them, owes the artistic inspiration, the shaky cam, the washed out tones, the music. Owes it to Saving Private Ryan, and it's one of the great injustices that film did not win Best Picture that year.
Yeah,
Ed Zwick's.
Anybody know what did?
Shakespeare in
Love, the forgettable Shakespeare in Love.
Not
that I'm bitter.
I talked to him about that too. Did you? Because he was the producer on that film.
At Shakespeare in Love,
winning one of those Oscars.
No offense to him.
Oh, we talked. So. He's a terrific guy. I mean, listen, he gave us 30 something. So I'm a fan. But I mean, yeah,
he's great.
I have a question. It is not more of a comment than a question, but it's going to come off this way. So for example, eschewing Shakespeare in Love for Saving Private Ryan, right? There were obviously things about Shakespeare in Love that made it a best picture. And I wonder, because one of the things that sort of I do in my research as I talk about women, I really sort of center them. But one of my arguments is if you look for them where they are not and where they never were, you're obviously not going to find them, right? So they're not on the beaches of Normandy and D-Day, but they are right back home, as you both have pointed out. But you could argue that there are plenty of World War II movies, like you talk about The Best Years of Our Lives. You don't see combat, but it is a World War II movie. I mentioned this to you earlier. White Christmas is a World War II movie. You do see combat as it's stated, but like it has to do with coming home and the struggles of coming home and coming home to your family. Women play a huge role in White Christmas, right? I mentioned League of Their Own, and then there's also For the Boys with Bette Midler, right? So I think we do get caught up in counting the rivets and getting excited about what tanks are going to be used. And I think we sometimes forget about those films too. And I would love to hear you both talk about some more of those films, because I'm not a film expert. I'm not a World War II expert. But those are the movies that I actually kind of like a little bit better than I like for other ones. So what are your thoughts on some films like that are definitely World War II films, but
Can I give you a really unlikely response to
Yeah.
this? It's actually gonna be Memphis Belle, and here's why. Memphis Belle is almost a Brat Packy, a second wave of Brat Pack attempt that comes out in the late 80s,
1990.
90, right? With a bunch of young men and so forth. But a friend of mine, Sarah Perry Myers, just wrote this book, Earning Their Wings, about the women air service pilots, women, the WASP.
Women Air Force Service Pilot.
Thank you,
Yeah,
right?
he's an alumnus of our fine university.
She is absolutely amazing and just a dear friend of mine, right? And she writes this. So if you watch this film, right, and it's all about these young guys, but read her work to see roles that women are doing in helping train these young men and so forth. It's absolutely. I mean, so there's homework to do with watching these films, but I think that's one of the things.
We're going to have her and someone talk next year to talk about her book. She's an amazing book.
I've got a copy of it.
Yeah.
She's been on for that film.
For that, yeah.
Yeah.
I favor A League of Their Own for the reasons you were talking about, the difficulty of being separated from a spouse, but also just women portrayed in a professional setting that is thought of as being for the war effort in a way, but it also has to do with athleticism too, which I'm a sports fan, so that interests me. The tension there in terms of the economics, I think reflects the larger trend line in the war, when women earned about 2/3 of what men earned. And yet still, this was a leg up for a lot of folks who may not have had this kind of opportunity that's sort of cosmopolitan for some of the players. And yet they still have to adhere to the gender standards of the time, where skirts on the field would be an example I'd give you. And still be ladylike and all this kind of stuff. And they have a male manager, quite significantly, played by Tom Hanks, who had been a real major league player, the guy he portrays. I kind of like that movie because it's got a lot of layers and it's got really good acting. I prefer it over that. And Memphis Belle, I think too, as long as we're talking about that, does have some gender elements to it as well, because there's an early scene where they're portraying a dance, which really would have happened at the 91st Bomb Group, which is portrayed in the film. They're at a base called Basingbourn, and that was one of the more fixed bases of the RAF. And they definitely had dances there all the time. And so they're portraying these interactions with British women, and you're seeing it through the point of view of the crewmen, of course. But also there's little cues you can pick up on too that are quite interesting. So that film, I kind of liked it on a number of levels. It's over the top in terms of all that stuff isn't going to happen on one mission. It happens maybe in your whole tour or whatever, but still it's film. It's well acted with a lot of people you're going to come to know pretty well there. Matthew Modine and Tate Donovan, Sean Astin, so on and so forth. So I think it shows the command setting. It shows the interaction with locals. But I just don't think there's enough movies that are dedicated to trying to round out, certainly in gender, but we could also talk about race too. But if we're talking about race too, let's not just talk about American concepts of race. Let's talk about Indonesia then, for instance. Indonesia loses, like I think the fourth or fifth most people in the war of anybody is somewhere up there. Because there's so many Indonesians who end up basically in forced or coerced labor for the Japanese. So what does that mean in terms of race and gender there? I mean, it's just endless. There's another movie, I apologize, I don't remember the name of it, that portrays the rape of Nanjing, that it stars Christian Bale. And so it's, again, kind of seen through a Western lens, but also, again, you're getting that larger sense of what this meant, the Japanese occupation of the city for Chinese women, especially teenagers, and also the other Chinese too. I mean, it's really, that one has a lot of layers too, which I apologize, I don't remember the title.
Okay, we got time for one more question.
Hi. So, my brain went kind of a little bit to some training films, which led to me thinking of this one sort of like propaganda thing on from like the late 60s, How to Spot a Communist. And so that led me to like films like World War II films from propaganda, mainly propaganda purposes. Sort of, we know we have our fair share, but we know like the Germans absolutely did. I mean, that was a big part of what Goebbels did, and the Soviets absolutely did as well. It's very hard to write anything that Zhdanov did not like without being sent to some sort of exile from your art. So, sort of what insights can we see from just sort of propaganda on the other side or from other countries? Not even necessarily the Axis, but Britain, France, the Soviets, or other sort of minor allies?
Well, there's a lot. Just the German side. I think German propaganda is still with us on many levels. And the reason I say that is when I say the German army here to all of you, I guarantee the first thing you think about is tanks and mechanization and all this kind of stuff. Actually, the German army was, most of its units had horse-drawn, vehicles, and they're moving their supplies that way for the most part. So why do we think otherwise? Because a lot of German propaganda, we're talking about propaganda, the footage portrayed that kind of cutting edge Germany with these new vehicles and the Blitzkrieg and how Germany was unstoppable and the Nazi regime was undergirding this. And so this kind of has remained in our popular memory, the Blitzkrieg and the German tank to this day. Germany was not a particularly automated society. I think it had maybe one vehicle per 40 or 50 people in the population at the beginning of the war. They made nowhere near as many tanks or trucks as the Allies. And so that's an example, I think, of German propaganda still kind of shaping our memory today. Soviet propaganda, of course, on many levels goes on through the whole Cold War, which we will tend to ignore because of the Cold War, in a way, the Soviet sacrifices in the war. But this is a movie we were talking about beforehand, Come and See, which is not a Soviet propaganda piece, but also might as well be in terms of what the Soviet people suffered during the war. The movie came out in 1985, so it's situated towards the end of the Cold War, or I'll call it that phase of it. I would argue the Cold War hasn't really ended. Look at where we are now, but I'm saying that phase of it. I think you definitely see the Soviet base point of what the war meant, and look how we sacrifice. What were you people doing in the West? Kind of there's definitely that whiff to it on some level.
I want to take a spin on that, actually, if you'll permit me, because there's been a thing that's just been gnawing at me the entire time that we've been talking about tonight. Propaganda, if we take a look, it's a story that we're trying to tell, right? A story that we're moving for. I'm interested also in the stories that we're actively trying to not tell. And one of the great, and there's a whole lot of them, not to end on a downer here tonight, but one of the great injustices during this war is Japanese internment, right? And we don't address that in film, right? So someone asked me earlier tonight, what stories would I like to see on film, right? These are also the stories. I live in Colorado. There's a place called Amache, which is a Japanese internment camp for people who were living, on the coast of California, who had who were forced to live behind a fence, under threat of a machine gun on a watchtower. Right? These are important stories. These are American stories that take place during World War II. They're not the stories that are the rah stuff, but when we look at they are the stories that tell us about our humanity, because these people survived these things. When I've been out to Amache a couple times now, and it is, I don't really have the right word for it. The place is special, and every single year, Amache is actually named after a Cheyenne woman. And the thing that happens every single year is that it's called the Amache Pilgrimage, where descendants of the Amache survivors and members of the Cheyenne community gather together to go and visit this site, because it's sacred to both of them. It's on Cheyenne lands, right, that were taken from them by the federal government and then used much later on as a concentration camp for Japanese American people. I mean, there's a lot there, and I've been there with both communities. That would be a story. I mean, I'd like to be able to see at some point in time.
There's only one movie I can think of. It's called a movie called Snow Falling on Cedars, I think. And I don't know when it came out, but I can't think of any other movie about the incarceration of Japanese Americans or
Midway kind of touched on it.
Midway did, yeah. 75 Midway does, sort of from a Hawaiian point of view in a way, but also, I mean, the lynchings that went on during and after the war, the blinding of Isaac Woodard that happens immediately after or near the end of the war, all these kinds of things. I think Jason made a great point in saying, what are the stories we don't want to tell, that we haven't told? And there's where the invisibility comes into the equation, what Ralph Ellison called invisible man, speaking of African Americans at the time. We could also say invisible woman too, in terms of a lot of the portrayal of World War II as well. That's just the nature of that beast, I guess.
Now that we've been on a happy note here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That's it.
We should thank our wonderful hosts tonight, and thank you everybody for coming.
And that's a wrap here at Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Thank you so very much to my guest, John McManus. Thank you, John. You can find John's podcast, Someone Talked, wherever you listen to your podcasts. I want to thank you again to both Margaret Grebovitz and Kate Shepard for bringing me out to Missouri S&T. I want to thank the university for having me. I want to thank the students and the people who came out. It was a packed house. It was really, really cool. I also want to thank my intrepid producer, Fletcher Powell. Maybe this is just Fletcher's show and I'm just Fletcher's host. Maybe that's where the ownership is. But thank you so much to Fletcher for making this show run. He is absolutely amazing, and this show would not be what it is without him. And finally, thank you to all of you for continuing to come back and listen to Reckoning and sharing this podcast. The best thing you can do is share this pod, tell your friends about it, share it on social media, and let everybody know what we're doing out here, because we're really trying to make a name for ourselves. So we have a bunch of pods coming up soon. We've got Lincoln coming up with Jelani Cobb coming up next week. That's going to be a lot of fun, and so many other pods coming as well. So thanks for being here, and we will catch you later. Ciao for now. Bye.